story that we are about to consider is that of two different people's reactions to God's Son. It's a story that shows how bias and background can affect how we think and act, how we assess life and people. It's how we invariably assess things through the lens of our own worldview, our view of the world as we see it. And we can't help that. But how can we break through all the mess and massive stuff that we build up to reassure ourselves that we're okay? So let's begin. In Luke chapter 7, the background to the story of the woman, Simon and the woman, is that in verses 11 to 15, Jesus raises the son of the widow in Nain. And just look at the response. In verse 16, and there came a fear on all, and they glorified God, saying that a great prophet is risen up among us, and that God hath visited his people. And this rumour of him went forth throughout all Judea and throughout all the region round about. Who is this one? He's clearly from God. It's obvious. But not everyone agreed. Some doubted. Then John the Baptist sends his disciples to Christ. Art thou he that should come, or look we for another? They weren't sure. Why? Because they had a preconceived idea of what Messiah should do. So what did Christ do? Well, in verse 21, and in that same hour he cured many of their infirmities and plagues and of evil spirits, and unto many that were blind he gave sight. Then Jesus answering, it means he responded. He's responding to their question. Said unto them, Go your way and tell John what things ye have seen and heard, how that the blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and to the poor the gospel is preached. Now that's exactly what God had said through the prophet Isaiah that Messiah would do. Truly, God had visited his people. The problem was that they hadn't seen that part of Messiah's role. They saw him as this great liberator who would come and save the nation. And he did, but not as they had thought. In the face of these incredible evidences that God was at work through this man, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, some believed, some are reticent, some are absolutely against him, and others are afraid to believe because of that opposition. And so he says, verse 23, and blessed is he whosoever shall not stumble in me. Look at the evidence. It's obvious. This is of God. Don't let self and prejudice blind you. just because I don't fit your picture of what Messiah should be. And then Christ provides that testimony concerning John the Baptist in verses 24 to 28. But look at the two responses to John that he explains. And here you've got this picture of two views of God's messengers. Verse 29, and all the people that heard him and the publicans justified God, being baptized with the baptism of John. But the Pharisees and the lawyers rejected. The Greek means set aside or disregard. They made a judgment and they cast aside the counsel of God, not against themselves, within themselves is the Greek. It's within themselves. They wouldn't allow themselves to be touched by what God obviously was saying through and in this man, by this man. So they would not be baptized of him. There are two approaches here then. So you've got one, the people that heard him and the publicans that justified God. So they accept the message and they justify God. The others justify what they had preconceived as being what it's all about. The one were childlike, humbly accepting what was obviously from God. The other had fortified within themselves their view of God and how it should be done. Now, God tried every way to reach these people, to get through, but he could not penetrate. They stumbled at the message of John, and they stumbled at the message of Christ. So in verse 31, and the Lord said, whereunto shall I liken the men of this generation? And to what are they like? They are like unto children sitting in the marketplace, and calling unto one another, and saying, we have piped unto you, and you have not danced. We have mourned to you, and you have not wept. God wants those of a childlike disposition, not childish. These were like cantankerous children who couldn't agree. Some wanted to play weddings. The others wanted to play funerals. One wanted to be happy, one wanted to be sad. And one didn't want to play the other one's game. And so they spit the dummy, no matter what way it was presented to them. So, in verse 33, for John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor drinking wine. And you say, he has a devil. The Son of Man has come eating and drinking, and ye say, behold, a gluttonous man and a winebibber, a friend of publicans and sinners. But wisdom is justified of all her children. So what does that mean? Wisdom is the ability to discern and to apply that discernment in life. It's the ability to assess things, to make judgments. That's what he's talking about. Wisdom has children. It's the outcome of that wisdom, whatever kind of wisdom that it is. It's all about how people judge, how they saw John, how they saw Christ, how they viewed publicans and sinners, how they viewed themselves. Whose assessment is right? Whose wisdom will be vindicated? Where does their wisdom come from? Who's the mother of this child? Well, it comes out in the actions. By their fruit ye shall know them. In the end, the wisdom that produced their conclusions will be manifest. The basis of those assessments and judgments will be revealed. Now, Luke illustrates what this means in the story of Simon the Pharisee and the woman who was a sinner. And we've got to see this strong connection here. So in verse 36, and one of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him. And he went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to meat. Now, why would this Pharisee desire that Christ eat with him? Well, he had heard the rumours of verses 16 and 17, that a great prophet is risen among us, and that God had visited his people. He'd heard that Jesus was a prophet because he says so in verse 39. This man, if he were a prophet, that's what he'd heard. And he sees him as a rabbi, a teacher, because that's how he addresses him in verse 40. But there's also a certain disdain, a lack of respect toward Christ, because he doesn't afford him the customary hospitality. Why? Because he'd also heard that he ate with publicans and sinners. You see, he had already judged Christ. But he feels it necessary to check this so-called prophet out, at least to confirm his suspicions. So why did Christ accept Simon's invitation? Well, Christ was no respecter of persons. He did not prejudge anyone. He wanted to save everyone. That's his spirit, even a Pharisee. And so Christ accepts the invitation, and while he's there, he sat down to meat. It literally means that he reclined, as was the customary fashion in those times, to eat food. And so we read in verse 37, and behold, a woman in the city which was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment and stood at his feet. Now, Luke wants us to know that something extraordinary has happened here. Behold, he says, look. Now, it wasn't so much that an outsider had just walked in off the street, as it were, into someone's home. Apparently, it was not uncommon for that to happen in Middle Eastern homes, for outsiders to come in off the street, as it were, and sit against the wall and just watch proceedings. But I think it's more likely that where they used to eat was outside in the courtyard under a sort of a pergola of some sort, and they had those reclining couches, usually in summer. The issue wasn't really that. It's that woman, a woman in the city which was a sinner. That's the problem. She was a sinner. She lived a promiscuous life. It would appear she was a harlot. She would never dream of just walking into Simon's house normally. She knew what kind of reception she would get. But she does. What drove her there, brothers and sisters? What empowered her to do this? As soon as she hears that Christ was to dine in Simon's house, in her city, she set off on her mission. So what was her mission? Well, verse 37 says, she brought an alabaster box of ointment. And the word brought is kamitso, or komitso. It means to tend, to take care of. It has the idea of carrying carefully in order to preserve and to care. So you can imagine this city, this woman, and I'm sorry, I naturally say imagine, but we have here this woman who brings this gift. She was bringing a gift to give to Christ. It's something very special to her that she wanted to give to him. And she stood at his feet whilst he was reclining, and she bursts into a flood of tears. In verse 38, and she stood at his feet behind him, weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with the ointment. Now this whole thing is spontaneous. It's something like this. She enters into that room with her gift. She wants to give it to Christ, and she carries it to where he was reclining. It's something like this, one of those triclinium layouts that they had in those times. She came behind him, and she's standing over Christ's feet, and she's crying, and her tears drip upon his feet. The word actually, where it says she washed his feet, it's the word breko. It means to rain, moisten, wet, to pour. So her tears were pouring out almost like a stream. And it was in the Greek, it's continuous. So it was pouring out. She's weeping continuously. Now she doesn't appear to have a veil, which perhaps is an indication of the kind of woman she had been. And so she kneels down. She has to kneel down at his feet to wipe the tears from his feet. Perhaps she sees that his feet are dirty. They hadn't been washed. And so she turns the circumstance of those tears on his feet to good effect. Certainly Christ saw her actions as such. And so she wipes his feet with her hair. She's totally overcome. She has this outpouring of emotion, of thankfulness. Now her face are near his feet. And she begins to show her feelings towards Christ. She kisses his feet. And she wants to show her appreciation more and more. You can imagine this woman so overcome with appreciation and at this moment. And she remembers her gift. And so she breaks open the box and she pours it upon his feet. And it's totally out of respect and love for his feet. She wants to show her love for him, and he was allowing it, allowing her to do this to his feet. She asked for no more. Now, why did this woman feel this way? Well, I'll show you why I believe it is so. We have Luke chapter 7 has a parallel account in Matthew's Gospel in chapter 11. It goes like this. We are going to turn to it, but here's the chronology. So what we find is that there is the matching parallels here. It's clearly the same time. So Luke only has the raising of the the son of the woman in Nain. But these are matching, and in between is something that Matthew has that Luke doesn't have, and then it continues on here. So we're highlighting this. These two incidents are inserted. So let's come to Matthew and let's see what happens here. Matthew 11, verse 20. Then began he to upbraid the cities wherein most of his mighty works were done, because they repented not. Woe unto thee, Chorazin! Woe unto thee, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works which were done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon at the day of judgment than for you. And thou, Capernaum, which art exalted unto heaven, shalt be brought down to hell. For if the mighty works which have been done in thee had been done in Sodom, it would have remained unto this day. But I say unto you that it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for thee. So what was their problem? It was pride. Exalted unto heaven, you shall be brought right down. Why? Because they thought they knew better. They could not bring themselves to repent. They were blind. They would not listen. Even though such amazing miracles had been done in them that would have convinced others who were less fortunate in that they never saw the Son of God perform such things. It was their pride. And so in verse 25, at the same time, Jesus responded and said, I thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent. They thought they had wisdom, and you've revealed these things unto babes. Even so, Father, for so it seemed good in thy sight. You see, you've got two classes of people again. Here's a class of people, unlike those who are full of their own pride and obstinate, full of their own view of how it should be. These are humble, childlike, who can see the obvious. They are usually not the privileged class, but those bowed down and generally barred from access. And unto them, he says in verse 29, come unto me, all ye that labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. And there was a woman in that crowd that heard Christ that day. She was well known in her town. She was a harlot. And why was she there that day? Well, we don't know. Perhaps someone had told her about this man, how he could liberate people. Or perhaps she was there for more mischievous purposes. We don't know. But Christ touched her soul that day with the gospel of peace. This man's religion and his teaching were to the heart. It was a religion built upon living principles, not mere ceremony. They were words of hope. They were words that meant that she did not need to remain trapped in her way of life. She wasn't locked in because of how life had treated her. She wasn't imprisoned because of stigma, trapped because she was already condemned by the religious hierarchy and the system. Never able to get out of the hole that she and life had dug for her. She knew that this wonderful man of God breathed hope into her. And he said, "Come unto me, and I will give you rest." So she did. And when she heard that Christ was staying in her town and went to a meal in a city in that town, nothing was going to stop her from showing her appreciation. No one was going to stop her, not even Simon the Pharisee. Those he represented, his religion, kept her trapped. This man of God gave her a new start. And she was going to take it. Her spirit is taken from where Christ is really alluding to in Isaiah chapter 55. I'd like you to come with me there. Isaiah 55. God willing, we will be coming to these verses again in our next study in the series. And hopefully this just reinforces it all. Verse 1. Ho, everyone that thirsts, come ye to the waters. And he that has no money, come ye, buy and eat. Yea, come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. Wherefore do you spend money for that which is not bread, and your labour for that which satisfies not? Hearken diligently unto me, and eat ye that which is good, and let your soul delight itself in fatness. Incline your ear and come unto me, and hear, and your soul shall live. And I will make an everlasting covenant with you, even the sure mercies of David. Here is hope to those without, that haven't got, that can't buy, that can't make it right. But in verse 6 it says, Seek ye Yahweh while he may be found. Call ye upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts, and let him return unto Yahweh, and he will have mercy upon him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. So she was going to seek him while he could be found. and she believed that she could be abundantly pardoned. So here was an uninvited woman who accepts the invitation of Christ. And here she was, kneeling in that room, oblivious to everything else other than the feet of this one who had brought her good tidings of great joy. The fact is, brothers and sisters, here was the Son of God. God had visited his people in a Son. He was near. And she felt she could come and touch him, pour her tears upon his feet. And he let her. The Lord, brothers and sisters, is the Son of God, but he's not unapproachable. He brings us to the Father. That's his whole purpose. That's the Spirit of the Father in the Son. So we're back in Luke chapter 7 then. All this while, Christ has not looked at her. He hasn't turned to look upon her. She knew that he was aware of her presence. I mean, it wasn't sort of as if he was unaware of what was happening to his feet. To her, this lack of response on his part was consent for what she was doing. And while the fragrance of that alabaster box and of her heart filled that room, there's another more odious spirit in that room. It's the human spirit exemplified in the Pharisees. They were very much aware of this woman's presence in that room and the spectacle that was taking place. Certainly Simon did. It wasn't so much that of what she was doing, but it was her, who she was, that was doing this. So in verse 39, it says, "Now when the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, he spake within himself, saying, This man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that toucheth him, for she is a sinner." This man. He's now confirmed his suspicions. He despises Christ. He condemns him, despite what he had heard about all the miracles that had been done. This man could be no prophet. And he's making this assessment of Christ within himself. They're his private thoughts. But Christ, aware of the woman, yet not acknowledging her, is also observing Simon. And because he was a prophet, could listen into Simon's thoughts within himself. And eventually he speaks. And when he does, he exposes Simon's errors, not only about Christ, but also about the woman. So in verses 40 to 48, Christ begins to show he shows beyond doubt that he knows this woman, both her past and her present condition. He shows that he knows what Simon has been saying to himself. And he was therefore a prophet and a discerner of hearts and minds. And he also shows that he had authority from God to save and even forgive sins. So we read in verse 40, "And Jesus answering said unto him, Simon, I have somewhat to say unto thee. And he said, Master, teacher, say on." Now Christ responds with a little story. Verse 41, "There was a certain creditor which had 2 debtors. The one owed 500 pence, and the other 50. And when they, both of them, had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which of them will love him most?" Now look at what Christ is doing here. He's asking Simon a question based on how Pharisees think, how they look at life. It's how humans really look at life. Most of us think like this. It's all measured and it's all legal. You expect so much, you do so much, and you expect so much in return. Now, what he has said here can't be correct, can it? Because Christ himself says in Matthew 5, "If you love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the publicans the same?" So it can't be tit for tat. He doesn't encourage this kind of thinking at all, does he? So what's he getting at? There's more to what Christ is saying. There's an underlying truth. And we can see that it's mentioned in the numbers. The numbers here are significant. They're made up of 5s and 10s. So we have 500 and we have 50. Now, so you've got 5s and 10s. And it is here, you can see it. It's quite clear. Well, it is to me. 10 is the number which represents all. It's the whole. Now, I know that many suggest that the number 5 means grace. It can be, but I can't find anywhere in the Bible where anything that is number 5 is mentioned where this is what I think it means. It's a portion of the whole, and I think that this very, very story here proves this point. It's a portion of the whole. It may be grace, but the subject is love. Of course, that involves grace. And the point is that all are in need of God's love. But that's not how Pharisees and humans see it. It's proportionate. Christ's point is that one of those numbers is a smaller portion than the other is of the whole. It's 500. It's definitely an equation. It reminds us of something, doesn't it? And this is what's hidden here. 500 is divided by 50. It's a tenth, a tithe. It's all proportionate, it's all legal, it's all according to the law. And notice Simon's response in verse 43. Simon answered and said, I suppose that he to whom he forgave most. So nonchalant. And Christ says to him, Thou hast rightly judged. Well done, Simon. You made a correct judgment, and Pharisees love to be right. Humans love to be right. But he was only right according to the way humans or Pharisees think. It's their kind of wisdom. So in verses 44, and notice this, for the first time he turns to the woman, but he's talking to Simon. Let's apply your judgment. Seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house, and thou gavest me no water for my feet. But she hath washed my feet with tears, and wiped them with the hairs of her head. Thou gavest me no kiss, but this woman, since the time I came in, hath not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but this woman hath anointed my feet with ointment. Now, what is Christ's point? He says, you judge that a person naturally will love more if she's forgiven more. Well, let me apply that to what I've found since I've come into your house. Let's compare that woman with you. You like comparisons? Let's apply your judgment, your wisdom. You didn't wash my feet. That's the basic, common courtesy of hospitality. At the base of it is the principle of esteeming your guest respect. Let's go one stage further, he says. You gave me no kiss. Once again, that was a common greeting out of respect, usually to someone you knew. You did not anoint my head, something done to honoured guests. Who was it that was in that room? What had he heard? Who was this one that is said to be from God? You gave me no respect whatever. This woman showed respect to my feet. She washed his feet with her tears from her heart. She genuinely, humbly, in a repentant and thankful, appreciative spirit, poured out her tears of repentance on his feet. There's no play acting, no procedure, no ceremony. She used her hair, the glory of her head, to wipe my feet. She anointed not my head, but my feet. She felt that she belonged there. Talk about respect. But it was all born out of love. Now, where did her respect and her love come from? Wisdom is justified of her children. It's seen in what it does. Now, we've got two minds here. Which is the most honourable? And so he continues to expose the mind of Simon. Verse 47, wherefore I say unto thee, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. For she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. Now this is ostensibly based on the Pharisees' mechanical or mathematical approach to religion. But there's a clever twist here. It looks like an equation, doesn't it? I think we all get the meaning of this expression. We get what he's getting at. But if you look at it, it's not an equation. It looks like one. She is forgiven much because she loves much. Whom little is forgiven, therefore, as a result, loves little. Now let's see if we can twist this into what ought to be the equation. She loves much, therefore she is forgiven much. He is forgiven little, therefore loves little. It's still not quite right, isn't it? Because you've got she loves, he is forgiven. It's around the wrong way, therefore. It ought to be like this. She loves much, therefore she is forgiven much. He loves little, therefore is forgiven little. But he doesn't say it like that. He really wants Simon to think. He wants us to think. This is what he says. He's trying to draw attention to two different mindsets. Christ wanted Simon and those in that room to stop and think about these words. And so do we. He's getting at motive. What's driving the motives? What is the wisdom that gives birth to these children? All are in need. And we respond according to how we see our need. That's what he's saying. We're all in need, but we respond to how we see that need. That's the reason, brothers and sisters, that we had to go through the pain of our last session on the wonder of forgiveness. We've really got to see that, and then it's liberating. Here was a woman who was not delusional about her needs. She knew exactly what her life had been, what she was, what she'd done. She knew she was a sinner and therefore condemned. She just didn't know how to get out of that. And Christ showed her the way. She had heard Christ speak. She had heard his gracious words. And she knew that he had the answer to her problems. And he had cried, "Come unto me." And so she came and she humbled herself before him. And she pours out her soul out of respect and out of love for this man, because he had shown love to her. And it's just wholehearted and open, because she knew what he'd given. But Simon, to whom little is forgiven, because Simon thought he had little which needed forgiveness. He hadn't seen his need. He thought he was keeping all the commandments because it was how he saw the law. It was preconceived. It's all packaged. That's how it works. It's like an equation. And as long as I'm doing those things, then there's the result. God's not even in it. A relationship with God is not even in it. It's all a surface religion. He doesn't look deep into what he is. Therefore, the same loves little. God's love was clinical, even legal. Hence, a harlot was to be judged, condemned, not pitied. She can't be redeemed. She's done it. She's cooked a goose. I haven't. Now, for the first time, Christ speaks to the woman. In verse 48, thy sins are forgiven. Now, the Greek is more emphatic, and it's also in the past tense. Forgiven are thy sins. They'd already been forgiven in heaven. And she possibly understood that she had been forgiven. That's why she poured out her thanksgiving and her respect and her love to Christ. She had seen that. But here Christ confirms it publicly. He did that for her and for the others in that room, so that they could look upon that woman differently. Whatever she was in the past had now gone. You can imagine the effect upon that woman. What relief! What utter joy! But that's not the spirit in the rest of that room. Their minds were no longer on the woman. She's just an object that can be dismissed. But verse 49, and they that sat at meat with him began to say within themselves. There it is again. That's where Simon had spoken to himself about Christ in verse 39. This is where they dismissed the counsel of God in verse 30. And they say, who is this that forgiveth sins also? It just can't penetrate. He just proved that he could read minds, that he was a prophet, that he was from God. Their minds could not be penetrated. They're locked into a biased view of how things should be. It's not responsive to God. They only looked through the lens of their legalistic view of religion. Or they would never say it out loud, it's within themselves. But hadn't they just witnessed who this man was? And notice it says that they began to say within themselves. He interrupts those thoughts by saying unto the woman and to those in that room, verse 50, thy faith hath saved thee. This is what they didn't have. Because their religion didn't allow faith. Their own biased understanding was based on words on a page, and if you conform to what it says, it's all legal. They didn't see the reality of a living God who's trying to convert hearts and minds. Minds like this woman whose faith was energized by God's love. And it's clear that their understanding of Christ has not changed. So their attitude towards this woman hadn't changed. So he says unto the woman, go, depart, go now, in peace. She has rest for her soul. She had been set free from her prison. But they were still locked under the burden of self-desire for control, despite the fact that God had visited his people in the very man that was in that room with them, God's own Son. Now we've seen then, brothers and sisters, the difference between these two ways of thinking. Wisdom comes in two different forms, and you can see that in their children. You can see the results. The one is petty and childish, even foolish, because of self. The other is humble and childlike and wise, despite self. The one is full of one's own self-importance because it's built a religion around that others can see that, and one can feel that, how important I am in the purpose of God. But the other is humble, sees that we're nothing like that, and desperately in need, and can see then with open eyes when it's obvious that God actually has provided a way back. We've got to be careful, brothers and sisters, don't we, that we don't let our preconceived ideas and views of life, how we were brought up, the way ecclesias do things, or whatever it is, we've got to let the Bible talk to our hearts. Let God work within us. Now, I'm not saying that those things, how we were brought up, or our ecclesial life is wrong. I'm not saying that at all. But at the heart of it, it's got to be God's word speaking to us. It's got to be building faith and coming to know God. Because we don't want to build up such a picture or be blocked off from God and not allow it to ever penetrate. Christ tried to show that, and he kept saying that. Trying to get through. He was not a man of a respecter of persons. He tried desperately with the Pharisees. That's why the ones that responded were those that saw their need. That's why, brothers and sisters, we need to see it ourselves. It's why so often we're brought to the depths of despair. God is trying to help us to see that need through our trials, and that he has the answer.